Choices. And choices are tricky things. We've all made some choices we regret. How many of you can think of a choice or two you regret that you've made in life? All right. Get some honest people here. And we've all made choices we're glad for, right? That we think back, we go, man, am I ever glad I made that decision? And Scripture certainly witnesses with that. Proverbs 2:11 says, wise choices will watch over you. Understanding will keep you safe. And so if that's true, if there's choices we regret and choices we're glad we made, if wise choices watch over us, then we ought to get better at making good choices. We ought to get better at making the kind of choices we'll be glad we made and at not making the kind of choices that we would regret. And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And there's a set of notes coming around that our ushers are handing out. You can take a hand of one of those, and it will help you follow along with what we're talking about. A guy named Larry Walters of Los Angeles had a boyhood dream to fly. But fate conspired to keep him from his dream. He joined the Air Force, but his poor eyesight disqualified him from the job of a pilot. After he was discharged from the military, he just sat in his backyard watching jets fly overhead. He hatched his weather balloon scheme while sitting outside in his extremely comfortable Sears lawn chair. He purchased 45 weather balloons from an Army-Navy surplus store, tied them to his tethered lawn chair, dubbed the Inspiration 1, and filled the 4-foot diameter balloons with helium. Then, armed with some sandwiches, beer, and a pellet gun, he strapped himself into his lawn chair. Larry planned to sever the anchor and lazily float to about 30 feet above his backyard, where he would enjoy a few hours of flight before coming back down. Things didn't quite work out as Larry planned. When his friends cut the cord anchoring the lawn chair to his Jeep, he did not float lazily up to 30 feet. Instead, he streaked into the LA sky as if shot from a cannon, pulled by the lift of 45 helium balloons holding 33 cubic feet of helium each. He didn't level off at 100 feet, nor did he level off at 1,000 feet. After climbing and climbing, he leveled off at 16,000 feet. At that height, he felt he couldn't risk shooting any of the balloons, lest he unbalanced the load and really find himself in trouble. So he stayed there, drifting, cold and frightened, with his beer and sandwiches for more than 14 hours. He crossed the primary approach corridor of the LA airport, where startled commercial airline pilots radioed in reports of a strange sight. In fact, all the radio reports that day started with the line, "You're not going to believe this." Eventually, he gathered the nerve to shoot a few balloons and slowly descend. The hanging tethers tangled and caught in a power line, blacking out a Long Beach neighborhood for 20 minutes. Larry climbed to safety, where he was arrested by waiting members of the LAPD and was led away in handcuffs. A reporter, you can imagine there was some of those, dispatched to cover the daring rescue, asked him why he had done it. Larry replied nonchalantly, "A man can't just sit around." The Federal Aviation Administration was not amused. Savvy Inspector Neil Savoy said, "We know he broke some part of the Federal Aviation Act, and as soon as we decide which part it is, a charge will be filed." So, there's a guy who just couldn't sit around, but how many of you know he could have made some better choices about what he did? And really, I think he reflects what a lot of us feel. I want to live a full life. Maybe a colorful life. I just don't know how, and I don't want to just sit around. I want to do something. And this is the truth about our lives. Life can be drab, boring, meaningless, dry. It can seem like just an 8-inch black and white, low-definition TV show. And yet, God in His Word promises us that it is His desire for us. He's the creator of life. It's His desire for us that life be full, be rich, be filled with adventure, and it be an engaging event, a passionate thing. So that's what God wants for you, and that's what you want for you. God made you to want to live that way. Even though sometimes we lose sight of that and we get sidetracked on that, that's God's desire for us, it's our desire for us, and it's good to be on the same side in that. God is not up in heaven serious, just kind of sour and trying to mess up our lives, make them miserable. He created life, and He made it to be good. Now, his definition of good and sometimes our definition of good are two different things. But when God talks about you living a good life, he means a life that is meaningful, joyful, growing, connected, not a problem-free life, okay, but a problem-overcoming life. Not an easy life, but an engaging life. And here's the freeing and yet terrifying reality about this life that God wants you to live. He invites you and I to choose it. He puts the ability to choose our lives in our hands. Mankind's greatest gift is also his greatest curse, that we have free choice. God made the world in such a way that the choices we make dictate the lives that we lead. We make our choices, but then our choices make us and eventually make our reality. And every choice we make has a whole series of products, has a whole series of end results. In a very real way, and I say this reverently, but in a very real way, we are co-creators with God of our futures. So, this is the passage that we're going to be looking at, and we looked at last week. Deuteronomy chapter 30. You might want to underline this one or maybe even memorize it. God speaking, he says, "Today I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and cursings. And now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Oh, that you would choose life, so that you and your descendants might live. You can make this choice by loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and committing yourself firmly to him." And then look at this last line. This is the key to your life. So we get to choose. And what God does here is he places responsibility back in our hands. You know, so many times we'd like to just throw things into God's hands, wouldn't we? I was just reading in my Bible this week, Jesus is with his disciples and they're preaching and they're ministering to these multitudes of people. And this one day it seems particularly hot, and it seems that Jesus is teaching particularly long, and the disciples have a problem. They're tired, they're hungry, the people are tired and hungry. And what do the disciples want to do with that problem? They want to hand it off to Jesus, right? And so they go to Jesus. Jesus, send the people away. It's been a long day. We're tired. We're hungry. And I love Jesus' answer. He says three words. You feed them. That's it. Jesus takes their problem that they brought to him, and he just hands it right back. And it's a problem that seems impossible. And of course, they have to then wrestle with Jesus in a discussion about that problem, right? And they say, Jesus, but that's not going to work. How can we feed them? We don't have enough food. And Jesus says, well, what do you have? Again, putting it back into their hands. Well, what do you have? And the story continues on like that. That is what God loves to do with us. And it's freeing, but it's also terrifying. It means that you and I can live intentional lives instead of living blaming lives. We can be responsible and proactive instead of just bouncing around and letting life happen to us. We can happen to life. And choice is a gift. It's a gift that you and I were meant to steward wisely. And if we take full advantage of it, we'll reap incredible benefits. So if this is the key to our lives, we better get better at it. We are where we are because of the choices we make. By getting better at our choices, we can increase our blessings and decrease our curses. We can take the areas of life that we are stuck, and instead of just blaming, we can ask, what choices am I making that are creating my reality in this area? What choices do I need to make to create a new reality? We can take areas where we're at a certain level, and we can say, what choices do I need to make to get to another level? Or maybe what choices do I need to stop making as well? And so how do you get better at making choices? That's what we're going to talk about today, and I've called it just becoming choosy. I'm going to give you 7 thoughts on how to get better at making choices, and that's why I gave you a set of notes there, because sometimes 7 thoughts are hard to keep track of, and so if you want to write those down, now I'll say a lot of things around them, and so you might want to find margins or other paper to take notes on as well if you're a note taker. But the first thing you and I can do to become choosy or better at making choices is actually to choose less. Choose less. You say, well, I just thought you told me that I got to choose and I should take advantage of choosing. Exactly. And here's the reality of human nature. Choosing is an exhausting endeavor. And when you overcomplicate choice, you become overwhelmed with the choices you have. When we overclutter choice, when we have too many options, we don't make good choices. In fact, here's the reality, and this has been studied out over and over again. When we have too many choices, we don't enjoy the choice-making process, we make worse choices, and we are less happy with the choices we make. Okay, so let's say you were going to buy a car, and you had 50 cars to choose from. Actually, let's narrow that down. Let's say you had 12 cars to choose from. Studies show that if you have 12 cars to choose from, you'll have a difficult time in the choice-making process. It won't be very fun. You'll make a worse choice on the car that you pick, and on top of that, after you've picked it, you'll have more regret, buyer's regret, because you'll think of all the other options you could have had. Now, if you have 3 cars to choose from, you'll have more fun making the choice, you will make a better choice, and in the long run, you will be happy with the choices you make. And you say, well, how could I possibly want to do that? Because isn't more options better? I mean, that's what we're taught, isn't it? Well, here's what you can do. You can think about the categories of choices you would like to make and narrow it down that way. Does that make sense? So instead of just walking into the car lot and saying, I want a car, you can say, I want a 5-year-old car. Well, that narrows it down, right? And I want a car that seats so many people. That narrows it down. And I want a car that has air conditioning this time of year, right? Well, that narrows it down. And so you can pre-make lots of your choices so that when you get there, you're able to make better choices. Now, I'm using the illustration of cars because it's simple and it's one that we can imagine quite easily. But this applies to every single area of our lives. When we overclutter our lives, when we overcomplicate our lives in any area, we overwhelm ourselves and we make worse choices. And the Bible talks about this lots. The Bible encourages us over and over not to overcomplicate our lives, overstuff our lives. We live in a society that loves just stuffing more and more and more upon our lives, don't we? There is just way too many good choices, and we're going to keep talking about that in a little bit. But look at 1 Corinthians 7 in the Message version. I do want to point out, friends, that time is of the essence. There is no time to waste, so don't complicate your lives unnecessarily. Keep it simple. In marriage, grief, joy, whatever. Even in ordinary things, your daily routines of shopping and so on, deal as sparingly as possible with the things the world thrusts on you. The world as you see it is on its way out. I remember when the first time in my life I had sort of saved and managed my finances, and so I had a little bit more money than just to buy my food. And it was pretty cool, because, I could go buy, like, cool clothes instead of the secondhand clothes, right? I was like, woo, this is awesome. And then I could go get, some possessions, like a car and things like that. And then eventually I could get a house, and that was pretty cool. And then I thought, wow, maybe I'd like, but you know what started to happen? Those cool clothes, I cared more about taking care of those cool clothes, right? And making sure they're ironed. And then that nice car, it had maintenance, right? And in fact, I don't know if you guys are like this, but if you have a nice old car, then you don't have to vacuum it out quite as often. It's weird how older cars need less vacuuming than new cars. But it's strange, and washing and so on. And I found when I had a house, all of a sudden there's a million maintenance items. You see, sometimes the power to choose is the power to overcomplicate our lives. And God in His wisdom speaks to us and just says, be careful. Be careful of the consuming mindset that just says, more is better, bigger, just get me more. And you get more and you'll get a mess in many cases in our lives. So one of the wise things we can do to make our choices is to narrow them down, to just simplify our lives a little bit. Many times there are choices we don't even need to make a decision on. We can just say, I'm not even going to think about that or worry about that. I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to be choosy about my choosing. I only have so much choosing energy, and so I'm going to focus on the things that matter in my life. And that's actually a management principle. A gal named Sheena Iyengar, I'm going to refer to her again a little bit later, but she refers to this for leaders and just says, be choosy about your choosing, leaders, because if you make 50 choices a day, the sheer fact that you're making multiple choices will make you worse at making choices because of the principle of being overwhelmed by choices. So instead, pick the ones that matter the most and focus on those. Proverbs 19:2 says, a person in a hurry makes mistakes. And just the other week, I was having one of those productive days. Anybody ever have a day where they just feel like they're getting a lot done? I was having one of those days. But I was feeling a little stressed, and I'm a little bit neurotic, if that's the right word. I'm not sure, but I get in a zone, and I'm like, whoa, let's go, let's go, let's go. And so I was on one of those rolls. Man, I was giving her. And our offices can tend to be busy, lots of people coming in and out, and lots of different things going on. And I'm an ADD kind of person. I get distracted quite easily. So I love when I get a chance to work over lunch. I didn't have any lunch appointments that day. So I ran to the store, and I got a salad. I was so proud of myself. Salad for lunch. And I got one of those fruit smoothie drinks. In a bottle, with the lid on it and all that. And those fruit smoothie drinks, if you look at the bottom of them, they're just got all kinds of gunk in it, right? So you got to shake it really good to get it going there. So I was sitting at my desk, enjoying my salad, multitasking. And when I say multitasking, I was really multitasking. I had papers and receipts everywhere over here, and I had emails I was doing, and I had papers I was working on, like on the computer, and then I had stuff on the other side of the computer, books open, and I had like 4 things I was doing at once, and just flying away and taking a bite of my salad and happy as could be. And I had my hand on the keyboard like this. I was typing out an email. Well, actually, I had both hands on the keyboard, but I reached to my juice like this, and I grabbed it and decided, to get the pulp through the whole thing to shake it. And it was like slow motion. I went like this. Like I shook it as hard as a guy, because you really want to shake that stuff, right? And I'll tell you, thick smoothie juice went everywhere. Just in these perfect, it was like a slow motion movie, on me, on my computer, on my papers. And all of a sudden my efficiency went from great to 0. And I sat there stunned. I kind of yelled out, I was, ah! And then I looked at my juice, which was almost gone now, and I actually burst out laughing and thought, now I have wasted a good hour because this is going to take a long time to clean up. And I set the juice down. I sort of relaxed for a minute, and I began the cleanup process, which took me the rest of lunch hour. In fact, when Kelly, our church administrator, came in after lunch, she said, it smells sweet in here or something. I said, yeah, that would be me smelling like fruit juice right now. So, suffice it to say, don't overcomplicate your life, because when you do, you can tend to make mistakes, okay? Declutter, slow down, whatever. Choose less. One more thought on this, and it has to do with temptation. Sometimes we expose ourselves to choices that we just ought not to even expose ourselves to. Your willpower actually gets used up. So on any given day, you just imagine your willpower like the health line in a video game, for those of you video game players. As you go through your life and make choices, especially difficult choices, it chews up a little bit of your willpower. And you ever done this with a temptation? You said no, and then you said no again, and then no again, and then no again, and then no again, and then maybe, and then, I'll have that cookie after all. Right? What has happened is our willpower just gets chewed up over time. And that's why wisdom says, many times, in places of temptation, just stay away from it. You all know this with shopping. You're not supposed to shop for groceries when you're hungry, right? So it's a matter of keeping away from the places that will force us to use too much willpower. whether it's the television, whether it's the internet, whether it's alcoholic drinks, whether it's places where we're tempted to lust, whether it's certain kinds of food, whatever it is, the wisdom says, just stay away from the place I'm going to have to make those choices. Even if I feel strong enough, even if I feel capable enough to make that choice, why waste my willpower on it if I don't have to? This is the way. Oh, watch this video, actually.
This is a test. How many times does the white team pass the rubber band ball? Go! If you answered 13 passes, you are correct. But did you see the black belt gorilla? Go!
Is simply that you can only focus on a few things at a time. The less things, the better our focus is, and we tend to miss things when we overclutter. About 50% of people see the gorilla, okay? There's several versions of that if you're interested in YouTubing it and a few other implications. So don't overcomplicate, and then stay away from temptations or things that will use up our willpower. Sometimes the best choice is just not to have to deal with the choice. In 2 Timothy 2:22, Paul just advises Timothy this exact thing. He says, run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts. So what happens? If instead of going and hanging out in places that are going to tempt me, I'm going to run the other direction from them. That's choosing less. The second choice you can make to get better at choices is to choose ahead. And this is a really, really good idea if you want to make wise choices. Choose when you're in your right mind. Right? Choose when you're strong. Choose when our emotions aren't running wild. Choose when I'm not overtired. Choose when my desires for immediate gratification aren't overwhelming. Choose ahead of time. Humans are notoriously bad at spur-of-the-moment decisions. We are influenced by our short-term desires and don't think about how the long-term many times. And that's why there's so much power in pre-making our decisions. And that's very much what Deuteronomy chapter 30 is about, isn't it? Choose today if you're going to cling to, love, and obey the Lord your God. Just make that choice ahead of time. Pre-make that decision. And when you pre-make that decision, then when the issue comes up in your life, the choice is already made. It's not that there's no decision there, it's just you've already made the decision. You've already made the choice. And so rather than being in the moment where emotions run high, where the immediate payoff can sometimes tempt us to make long-term sacrifices and so on, choose ahead. And choosing ahead also has to do with vision, doesn't it? Looking at the long road, at times making short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. You know, the reality is this. When you play now and pay later, does anybody know this? You should know this because your pastor preaches on this all the time, okay? When you play now and pay later, you always play less and pay more. But if you'll pay now and play later, you'll always pay less and play more. So the whole idea is make a temporary sacrifice. I'm going to save my money and make the purchase once it's saved up. Instead of I'm going to borrow the money, right? And then I'll pay it off over time. What happens if you borrow the money and pay it off over time? You pay more, you play less. You get less enjoyment out of it. What happens if you save it up and then you buy it? You actually get more play, less pay. And you know what the problem is for us in that whole discussion? We all kind of go, oh, I know that's true. I just wish it wasn't. Well, if we just really believe it's true, not just know it's true, but believe that's true, we'd be excited that that's reality. We'd be like, yay! Now I know the principle and I can do it. I can choose with vision in mind. Do you remember in the book of Proverbs it says, without a vision, people perish? Another translation of that just says, without a vision, people cast off restraint. In other words, if I don't have a reason to save, to pray, to seek God, to spend time in the Word, to eat healthy, whatever discipline or decision it is I'm making, to spend time with my kids or invest in my relationships or whatever choice it is that I'm making, if I don't have a reason to do it, well, then I'm not disciplined about it. People without a vision just cast off restraint. Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, made a choice. He made the choice to suffer with God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. How did he make that choice? It says this in Hebrews 11:26. He valued suffering in the Messiah's camp far greater than Egyptian wealth because he was looking ahead. He was anticipating the payoff. He was able to make his choice with vision. And that's what choosing ahead does. It gives us the ability to endure a hardship now for the joy that is before us. There's a Harvard professor, I mentioned her earlier, Sheena Iyengar. In her book, The Art of Choosing, she writes this. There are quite a few services and devices that can aid us in these matters by enabling us to pre-commit when our wills are strong and to avoid making the wrong choice when they are weak. We can impose penalties on our poor choices, right? You can actually set up for yourself rewards and punishments and so on for your choices when your will is strong. For example, the snooze and lose alarm clock is a nifty little gadget if you are a chronic oversleeper. Every time you hit the snooze button, the clock automatically connects to your bank account through the internet and donates $10 or more to a pre-selected charity. Its creators recommend for maximum effect you choose the organization you despise, what they call an anti-charity. And I actually looked this up. It's true. You can buy this alarm clock. It's only $40, and it will save you from sleeping in incredibly. So those are the kind of things choosing ahead can do for us. So I'm going to choose less. I'm going to declutter my life, stay away from temptation so I can choose less. I'm going to choose ahead. I'm going to make the choices when I'm at my optimum place for making the best decision. The third thing is to choose small. Choose small. And what I mean here is simply to make the small choices in life, the little decisions, well, and the bigger decisions take more care of themselves. I have had the opportunity several times to talk to men on the subject of lust and sexual temptation. And of course, that's a kind of a hot topic. People are interested in that. And when you get a group of guys together and talk about that, for the most part, guys are really desirous to learn. How do I deal with this? How do I fight this? One of the best pieces of advice that I give people on this topic, win the small battles. Fight on the smallest front that you possibly can. Think of the smallest temptations you have in this area. Just a glance, just a thought, just the smallest ones. Fight hard on that front in the small areas. And you'd be amazed how seldom the bigger ones come up. But compromise on the small areas, just, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. Well, that's not that big a deal. And you'd be amazed how often the bigger temptations you battle with. Small decisions, small things add up huge over time. Some of the most famous words in the love book of the Bible, Song of Solomon, come out as a proverb. It's the little foxes that spoil the vine. The little foxes, the little things that end up ruining the bigger things in life. Jesus said it this way in Luke 16:10, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest in greater responsibilities. So if there are some big choices you are struggling to make, ask yourself, what are the smallest bite-sized choices I need to start making in this area of my life? And you will find as you accumulate little gains, little wins, that the larger choices become easier to make. This can be difficult in life because sometimes the people around us are kind of like, you know what? Of course on those big issues you shouldn't do stupid things. Of course on the major issues in life, right? Of course you shouldn't steal from the company. Of course you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. Of course, on the big issues, of course you shouldn't borrow and get in way over your head, right? So the world around us is like, yeah, on the big issues we agree. Don't do stupid, don't make bad choices. But then many times the crowd is going the other direction when it comes to the small choices. And when you make the right choices in the small area of your life, sometimes your friends or the people around you can kind of be like, come on, that's no big deal. Of course you can watch that on television. It's not that bad, right? Of course you can listen to that or do that or say that or spend that or get in debt that way because it's not that bad. It's just a little thing. Come on. Why are you being so strict? Why are you being, well, I'll tell you why. Because I know it's the little things that add up. It's the little, and I'll tell you, especially for young people, as people get older, they get more experience, right? They learn some of this stuff just in life. But sometimes for young people, they're walking in God's direction. They're walking God's way with their life. And there's this whole crowd of young people walking past them going, woo, I'm a rebel. I get to do things my way. I'll make stupid choices. Woohoo, see, it doesn't affect me. See, it doesn't hurt me. Be careful of that. Be careful of believing that. It might look good for a season, but those small choices, those seemingly insignificant things, they will add up and they will create some big moments later on, one way or another. So, choose small. The fourth one, choose better. Okay, choose better. And I mentioned this earlier. We live in a day of choosing way too many good things. There's just so many awesome options around us in our lives. You need the ability to choose between good and evil. That's an important ability. But once you've developed that, another important ability is to choose not just between good and evil, but between good and better. Between good and better. Because there's just way too many good things in our lives. Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, and where he just makes this statement, good is the enemy of great. We fill our lives up, and here's what our temptation is. Somebody comes to us and says, well, this would be good. Why don't you do this? And we, okay, I'll do that. Well, this would be good. Why don't you do that? Okay, that seems good. Well, this would be good. How many of you here have children that are school-age children? Okay, a few of us. Children have lots of extracurricular options, right? Lots of options. So a class comes up. Hey, that's a good thing. Let's join that class, right? And then a sport comes up. Hey, that's a good thing. Let's join the sport. Hey, there's music program. Okay, that's a good thing. Let's do the music program. And what do we find, parents? Once we've chosen 15 good things, they aren't so good anymore, right? There's too many of them. There's just too much good going on. I need less. I need to not choose between good and bad, but good and better. And if I choose too many good things, I'll miss out on the better things. And so wisdom says, learn what's better and choose that. Don't just take the first thing that comes along. And over again, this concept of better comes out in Scripture. Proverbs 16:16, how much better to get wisdom than gold and to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. There's going to come days where I can choose. So choose the better. Better is one day in your courts, God, than 1,000 elsewhere. Is it good to go to do this and good to go to do that? Yes. But is it better to come to church? Good question, huh? Is it good? Or let me just give you another one. A good name is better than great riches. A good name is better than great riches. So I'm going to keep my name. Jesus one time looks at Mary and Martha, both doing good things. And he just says, Mary has chosen the better part, fellowshipping with God. Every time you say yes to something, you are of necessity saying no to hundreds of things. Did you catch that? Every time you say yes to something, you are of necessity saying no to hundreds of things. I'm a passionate book reader, and this is one of the principles of book readers that they have to understand. Every time I say yes to reading one book, I am saying no to reading thousands of other books. I can't possibly read every book on the planet. So I don't want to just choose good books. I want to choose better books. If I just take every good book that comes near. So remember that. Every yes choice is of necessity a no to many other things. So I'm wise to choose better. All right. Now I know this is a lot of stuff, right? But we're going to gain wisdom today. We're going to get better at our choices. The next two kind of go together, and they happen very quickly. The first is choose reality. Some people get stuck trying to choose things they simply can't choose. And it's wise to simply say, this is unreasonable, unchangeable, and I'm going to get over it, right? I'm going to suck it up, princess, right? I'm just going to recognize that this is not possible. And really, what the best way to think about this one, to choose reality, is to just say, I'm going to stop complaining. I'm going to stop complaining in my life. Every time you complain, what you're doing is you're wrestling with something you either can't deal with, and therefore shouldn't even worry about it, or you can just make some good choices about, and therefore you shouldn't worry about it. Does that make sense? Paul said it this way in Philippians 4:12. He said, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He just says, hey, I'm going to live my life that way, accepting reality. Now, here's the critical piece on accepting reality. There are some things you just need to do that with. But the critical thing is discerning which things to just accept as reality and which things to say, no, I'm going to fight for better in this area of my life. Now, our past is reality. Isn't that right? You're not going to change the past. In fact, that's why this verse, Deuteronomy chapter 30, is so powerful. Today, I am setting before you life or death, blessing or cursing. I love that he just starts with today. Because you can't, we do a series on choices. We could sit here all day and just talk about our regrets. Man, I shouldn't have done this. Look at this in my life now. I'm reaping the curses of the stupid choices I've made. Oh, man. And we could spend our whole life just spent in regret. That's a bad choice, right? Instead, I need to choose reality. The past is past today. And so that leads me to the sixth one, which goes with the fifth one. Choose reality, but also choose hope. Choose hope. The serenity prayer says this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There are things I can't change. Choose reality. There are things that I need courage to change. Choose hope. And then, God, give me the wisdom to know the difference. And that's what God invites us to do, to choose hope in our lives, to choose that today I have hope. Today I can move forward. Today I can believe that God wants to do good things for me. And maybe before I go on this, I just want to speak about this, and this, I wasn't planning to, but I really feel like this would be important for some people here today. Sometimes in this area, we look at our own lives and we tend to give up hope. It's a story that the way they train elephants is that when they're little baby elephants, they put a stake in the ground and they tie a chain or a rope to the leg of the elephant. And that little baby elephant tries with all its might to get away and discovers it can't go more than 10 feet away from this stake. The rope just holds them to it, or the chain holds them to it. And of course, elephants have a good memory. And so what happens is as that elephant grows, he knows that he can't ever possibly get away, and so he never tries. And elephants can be completely trained this way. They'll just know the end of their rope, and they stop right there. They never take a step further. Of course, the reality is, that big elephant, when he's fully grown, he doesn't even have to try. He could just take a step and pull that stake out of the ground. But he never even tries. And sometimes in our lives, we have areas that we think, I've done this way my whole life. I can't get out of this. It's hopeless. There's no chance. And God would want you to know today, you're right. By your own power and by your own strength, there's no chance. But God has given us the power. I love the way it says it in 1 Corinthians 10:13. There's no temptation taken you, but that which is common to man. God is faithful. He will not suffer you to be tempted above what you are able. He will always provide a way out. Always provide it. And so there are some areas like that where we've lost hope, and God wants to put hope back in and say, break free, step out, not in your own strength, but in the power of God. Choose hope. Choose to believe. Just like we were praying earlier today about the God of the impossible. Choose that faith orientation. So, how am I going to choose? To get better at choosing, I'm going to choose less. I'm going to declutter my choices, be choosy about what I'm spending my choosing energy on. I'm going to choose ahead. I'm going to choose with vision and pre-make my choices when I'm strong. I'm going to choose small. I'm going to realize that the little choices in life add up to big choices. I'm going to choose better because of necessity. Every yes is a no to many things, many even good things. I'm going to choose reality. I'm not going to obsess on the past or things that cannot be changed. I'm going to choose hope. I'm going to see the good things that can happen in my life. And the last one is choose trust. Choose trust. After I have done my best to figure out what God's will is, after I've done my best to walk the right path, after I've done my best to make the right choices and to use God's wisdom and to get counsel around me, here's what I need to believe and trust in God for, that God indeed will direct my path. And many times when people come to me as a pastor and say, Pastor, I'm looking for direction in my life. I want God to speak to me. I want God to tell me which way to go. I take them to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. And then what will happen? He shall direct your paths. Do you know how I read this verse? I read it that if I do my part using the wisdom that God has given me instead of my own wisdom, getting wise counsel around me, praying for God's direction in my life, all of those things, that many times, rather than God stepping down from heaven and looking me in the face and saying, Daniel, this is the way you need to go, that many times instead of that, God simply directs my path. That I can trust that if I've done my part, that God will do His part, and that the steps I am taking are ordered by the Lord, is the way it says it in Psalms. That God is indeed ordering my steps if I trust Him to. My wife is reading a book right now called Sticky Faith. It's done some studies on the children that are raised in the Christian life and how some leave their faith and how some stay, and what can be done to have sticky faith, that children would stay faithful to God through their lives. One of the principles that comes up here is that parents whose kids have sticky faith don't just teach their children to obey God. They teach their children to obey God because they trust God. Okay? And you're like, well, what's the difference? Well, let me explain it this way. You ought to do what's right. You ought to obey whether you like it or not. Just do it. Just obey. Just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Just do the right thing or else. Well, okay, that's true, right? But it's not very motivating. So let's turn it around. You need to do the right thing to do. You need to obey because it's the right thing to do. But more than that, because you trust that God is a good God and He has good intent for you and He wants your life to be great. Do you see the difference there? That's pretty motivating, isn't it? What's the difference? One is obedience for obedience sake. One is obedience motivated out of trust. Sometimes obedience is actually motivated out of mistrust almost. It's almost like God's against me, right? He's there waiting to pounce on me. Instead of saying, no, my God is a God I can lean upon, believe in, trust that He indeed has my best interests at heart. So, we can get better at choosing. I know these are a lot of things you can get better at choosing, but here's the reality. As you just work on these one thing at a time, wise choices will watch over you. And so here's my prayer. It's just, God, teach us to get better at choosing. Because as we do, we find out that we live in His blessing rather than cursing. We enjoy full and rich lives rather than dull and dead lives. Why don't we stand together?